we are going to focus on writing this given quadratic function in standard form. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is essentially you kind of want to separate that number that's hanging out at the back and kind of just leave it at the back for now. And you want to factor out a GCF from these first two terms. Now, if we're factoring out a GCF from the first two terms, that leading term is negative, so we definitely want to pull that negative out. And we want to pull out actually just the -2. So we're factoring out the GCF for the numbers. We're going to leave the x's in there. And we're just going to pull out the -2. And if we pull out a -2 here from the front, that gives us a positive x squared plus 8x. And we're going to leave this minus 30 back over here at the end. Now, what we're going to want to do next here after we do this is we're actually going to want to complete the square. So in completing the square, what we do is we're going to take half of b and we're going to square it. And we are going to add it in over here as our number so that we can then factor this trinomial here. Remember that b is always the coefficient of x to the first power. So for us, b is going to be 8. So if we plug that in here, half of 8, and we're going to square that. Well, half of 8 is 4, and 4 squared is 16. So what we're going to do is we're going to add 16 over here. Now, when we do that, what we're actually doing here is we have this -2 out here in front, and we know this -2 gets multiplied to this entire trinomial. So that -2 does get multiplied to that 16. By us adding that 16 there, this is really a -2 times 16, and we've added -32 as part of this piece over here. And we can't just add a -32 on its own because that changes our equation. So what we're going to have to do here, because we added a -32, now we have to add a positive 32 to the end. Right? We put in -32. We also have to put in a positive 32 to balance it out, since -32 plus 32 are 0. Right? We have to make sure our equation is balanced. Now, the whole reason why we are adding that 1/2 b squared and subtracting it to our equation is so that we can factor this. When we factor this trinomial here, this should always factor into a perfect binomial squared. Or perfect trinomial squared, I'm sorry. So whenever we factor this, we're getting the same factor here, right? Typically when we factor, it factors into a set of 2 parentheses here. For us, that x squared tells us it's going to be an x times an x for each one. That 16, well, factors of 16 to add or subtract to get 8 are going to be 4s. And everything is positive, so everything's positive in our binomials here. So we really just get x plus 4 times x plus 4. So we just compile that into one factor and square it. Now, back here at the end of the equation, we had that -30 from the beginning, but we had to add 32 to it to balance it out. And a -30 plus 32 here at the end leaves us with a +2. This gives us our equation in vertex form.